welcome. A few technical remarks at the beginning. We have today an event with 3 languages, in English, French, and Spanish, and all 3 languages will be spoken. For the people who watch us online, you go to the globe symbol in Zoom and select your translation channel. And for the people in the room, we have devices here at the back of the room where you enter the room, which you can take. The channels are 1 for Espanol, 2 for français, and 3 for English. In the room there is a Wi-Fi if you want to use that. If you have your smartphones, keep it available because we will later use it also for some questions and some pollings. And a final remark on the privacy issues. All of you have agreed that this meeting is going to be recorded and it will be also later published online. And with that, I hand over to Alexandre Navarro, the maître de conférence. Alexandre, you've got the floor.
Merci beaucoup, Lutz. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Je suis le secrétaire général de la Commission française pour l'UNESCO.
I'm the Secretary General of the French Conference at the UNESCO. Thank you that's organizing this event.
Por estar aquí con nosotros justo antes de MONDIACULT. Bienvenida en nombre
de la Commission allemande, de la Commission française, de tous nos partenaires. Et puis en ce moment aussi remercier nos partenaires institutionnels, financiers qui nous ont permis d'être
our institutional partners who financed and helped us to be here. We want to thank the German Federal Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the French Ministry of Culture, and want to thank Institut Français and its director.
Nous allons avoir,
Thank you so much. We're going to have in this segment the honor and the opportunity to have with us 3 institutional representatives from France, from Germany, from Kenya,
pour ces premières prises de parole que je vais appeler
so I'm going to be calling the speakers one after the other. I want to thank first and foremost
Monsieur Simon de Galbert, qui est conseiller de coopération et d'action culturelle à l'ambassade de France en Espagne, directeur général de l'Institut français en Espagne, Madame Son Excellence Christine Purcell, qui est ambassadrice
and Christine Purcell, who is the ambassador of Germany in the UNESCO, Madame Christine Picat, who will be representing UNESCO, the director of the Culture Service. I want to thank the
ses travaux depuis son lancement. Alors
estos trabajos desde su inicio.
Ministère
from the beginning, and the representative of Kenya, there were some problems with her flight, but Madame Bashir will give us the honor and the pleasure to be here if her agenda allows her. Mr. the Councillor of Cultural Action, you have the word. Please come over here.
Madame l'ambassadrice.
Madame Ambassador.
Madame l'ambassadrice et déléguée permanente
Madame
de l'UNESCO.
Permanent delegate of Germany at the UNESCO. Madame the director of the culture, representative of the culture sector at UNESCO, the representatives of the national commissions at the UNESCO, and I greet the German, the French, and the Kenyan delegations who are here today and who have organized here. I want to thank the Institut Français in Barcelona. Thank you to its director, Madame Valérie Nicolas, the representatives of the non-governmental organizations and civil society organizations.
Civil implicados en los derechos culturales. Señoras y señores, estoy encantado de
to receive you here at the French Institute in Barcelona in the name of Madame Karine Rispail, the French ambassador in Spain, and she asked me to represent her today, and as a director general of the French French Institute in Spain. I am extremely happy to be here with you for one day before the World Conference on Cultural Policies and Sustainable Development at UNESCO that will take place in Barcelona starting tomorrow. It is a creative city for the UNESCO in literature, but it is a creative city in general, as I have seen today, especially in architecture, because Barcelona, will be the world capital for architecture in 2026. In 2022, during the Mondiacult conference in Mexico, after the call of the Kenyan, Colombian, French, and German delegations, the Charter for Cultural Rights was launched in 2024. So this was a very important event. So this charter, this pact is a commitment for a multilateral cultural cooperation that is equal and that is open to our southern partners' contribution to apply the objectives of the 2005 Convention on the Protection and the Promotion of the Diversity of Cultural Expressions. And this today is the 20th anniversary, and France played in 2005 a very important role for its adoption. And this charter is also a mean to fight for the intellectual property of the artists and the authors in these disruptive events of artificial intelligence and developments that we're seeing. So the Charter has more than 200 institutions and individuals from the whole world who undersigned it. It is translated in 10 different languages, and it talks about 8 principles to have decent conditions of work and ethics in the digital world, and also awareness raising for the audiences, and also to carry out actions internationally in order to have a free and equitable access to culture in all its dimension for all. So these are the principles that we want to put in place in the field of culture and cultural economy. The participation of all the cultural actors in the international debates is absolutely essential in order to...
Que le fait que cette réunion ait lieu à Barcelone, de ce point de vue, a un sens également, puisque la Barcelone est la communauté dans laquelle nous nous trouvons. Ils me l'ont redit encore il y a quelques jours lors de mes entretiens avec la Generalitat.
Cuando hablé con la Generalitat,
important.
The responsibles of the regional presidency, they told me that Barcelona has a very important place for promoting culture. So that's why it is very important for us to be here in this city. So having the largest number of actors that represent the diversity of cultures, of creation, and of fields that will be able to mobilize more and more people. And France calls for a reinforced dialogue between all these stakeholders, especially the actors of the culture and creative industries and digital industries, in order to fight for copyright and intellectual property. So in France, we have a vision of culture as being very specific, because it's not a commercial good like others. And today we'll be debating on many things like the labeling and the diversification of the different creators, and to have a just remuneration of the artists and their rights. So that's why I'm extremely happy between us to have representatives of very important organizations of arts and culture in the whole world, and also representatives of the academia and the private sector as well. So the collective mobilization around a charter for a just culture has a common objective of culture and peace, and fighting for equity in culture is fighting for the values of UNESCO, and fighting for the promotion of cultural diversity that are essential for the exchanges and the understanding between the people and between the generations. And once again, welcome to the French Institute in Barcelona, and I wish you a wonderful debate this afternoon, and thank you very much for being here.
Excellences, chers collègues,
Excellencies, dear colleagues, dear friends in the cultural sector, dear UNESCO family, in the name of the Federal Ministry of Germany and in the name of all the German delegation in Mondiacult, I welcome you here. It's a great pleasure to see that you have decided to leave the streets and the beaches of this wonderful city in this beautiful and warm afternoon to be with us. You did it basically in favor of a very important issue, which is to improve the precarious situation of many artists, creatives, and cultural professionals around the globe. Just one day ahead of the historic UNESCO Mondiacult World Conference, it is about a fair culture that we want to talk today. The Federal Foreign Office in Germany has always supported for many years the fair culture, and this initiative embodies the core values that we hold dear in our government's foreign cultural relations to foster fair cooperation across the borders in the cultural sector and to ensure decent and equitable living and working conditions for artists and cultural professionals worldwide. I would like to express our gratitude to the national commissions of UNESCO for Germany, France, and Kenya. I want to thank the Goethe Institute, the Institut Français, and the other international partners for their dedication in organizing this encounter on fair culture that is integrated officially to this World Conference. Today, we will focus our decisions on the Fair Culture Charter, which was published exactly 12 months ago. It is an important achievement because it really defines in detail what we understand as fair culture. It's not only a higher payment, but it's much more. So basically, we include ecological sustainability, market access, and non-discrimination, among others. It is important to cover the Fair Culture Charter that was developed following Mondiacult 2022, and a very similar side event that was organized 3 years ago in Mexico City. This elaboration of this charter went through a participatory process with leadership from the Global South and coordinated by the German Commission for UNESCO. This charter has already been signed by more than 200 cultural institutions, by ministries, national commissions for the UNESCO, as well as by individuals. And we hope that many more will follow signing this charter after this event. And I hope that all of you who are present here or are following online have already signed. I would like to extend a special thank to Professor Guevremont for her remarkable leadership in this initiative as an author of a study in 2021 on fair culture and as a head of the editorial team of this charter. Thank you once again for sharing your invaluable expertise with us today. We also want to thank the panelists of this event who came from all corners of the world. Through the invitation to today's event, you will be able to participate also to Mondiacult from tomorrow. We hope that today's event will further energize the Fair Culture Initiative, ensuring that labeling and certification systems for the culture and creative industries based on fair trade principles and in line with this charter will be explored. The fair culture is not merely a concept, it is a promise. Its success is based on our ability to forge an active and collaborative coalition. Therefore, the German government, alongside the German Commission for the UNESCO, will support the Fair Culture Initiative in the years ahead, together with a large network of international partners. Dear colleagues from Kenya and from France, We are so pleased to move forward in this alliance with you. Thank you also to UNESCO, in particular the culture sector, to Christophe Vicat and the Sub-Director General Ottone also for your support. The Mondiacult conference and today's event are taking place in a critical juncture. We must build commitment and integrated efforts for the long term. Fair culture fully aligns with the goals of the Mondiacult conference. This charter fully supports the understanding of culture as a global public good. It strengthens human rights and cultural rights, and it advocates for a prominent role for culture in the post-2030 agenda. Dear guests, I am genuinely looking forward to our discussion today, and I wish you all a fruitful and inspiring discussion. Thank you very much.
Excellencies, Madame Ambassador, Monsieur le Directeur Général, Monsieur le Secrétaire Général, ladies and gentlemen, experts, colleagues, friends. It is an honor for me to represent the UNESCO culture sector and in particular Mr. Ernesto Ottone, our Assistant Director General for Culture, at this important pre-event of Mondiacult 2025. We gather here around the shared conviction that culture must be fair, inclusive and sustainable, because its power to inspire, connect and enrich societies depends on it. The German, Kenyan and French national commissions have been the driving forces of this conversation with remarkable energy over the past years. Since the first consultation in 2022, the idea of fair culture has grown into a movement, now embodied in its charter. This comes at a critical time. In recent decades, global trade in cultural goods and services has expanded rapidly. Yet this growth has been far from equal. Cultural trade remains deeply imbalanced. Many artists and cultural professionals face precarious working conditions, while access to global markets still depends too much on where the artists are based. It is precisely for this reason that the Fair Culture Charter matters. It calls for decent working conditions, fair remuneration and more balanced cultural exchanges across creative value chains globally. UNESCO is very proud to have supported the development of this initiative, which aligns with our work, particularly through two key
Deux instruments.
Con dos instrumentos, la recomendación 980 que tiene que ver con el estatus de los artistas.
The 1980 recommendation calls on member states to strengthen the social and economic rights of artists and cultural professionals. Complementing this, the 2005 Convention recognizes the dual nature of cultural expressions, both cultural and economic, and promotes equitable opportunities for creation, production, and access to cultural goods and services worldwide. In this context, the Fair Culture Initiative helps translate these principles into concrete guidance, bringing UNESCO's, our shared vision into practice. Ladies and gentlemen, our discussions today will be especially valuable as we approach Mondiacult, the world's largest cultural policy conference that starts tomorrow, and whereby one of the central themes is also artificial intelligence, which is also one of the primary challenges for fair culture. This fair culture event embodies the same spirit of interaction and exchange and serves as a reminder of a principle at the heart of both this charter, but also Mondiacult. Cultural rights must be guaranteed for all and upheld by all. We are here in Barcelona to foster the kind of dialogue we urgently need, where policy meets practice and where solutions are shaped together. The exchange we have today will help inform the work of UNESCO's member states and contribute to shaping the global cultural agenda. As we launch the discussions at Mondiacult, we have an opportunity to turn ideas into action. Let us carry forward these insights, questions, and solutions from our discussions today. UNESCO stands ready to continue working hand in hand to help shape a cultural ecosystem where artists thrive, diversity is celebrated, and cultural rights are lived, not just declared. Thank you very much for your attention.
Merci, Madame l'ambassadrice, Monsieur le directeur, Madame la directrice, pour ces mots qui démontrent encore une fois, je dirais, l'importance et la pertinence de cette réflexion sur la culture équitable, tel qu'il est porté en tout cas par les différentes institutions et autorités représentées aujourd'hui. Alors vous me direz, mais qu'est-ce que la culture équitable? Alors, qui de mieux placé que Véronique Guévremont, responsable de la chaire UNESCO?
Véronique Guévremont, who is responsible at the University of Laval of the UNESCO chair on fair culture. She has coordinated also the works on fair culture, and she was behind the initiative, as Madam Ambassador just said it, and she worked on fair culture and on the application of this model of fair trade and fair economy to culture. And we have the pleasure now to hear Madame Dominique Guévremont on this concept of fair culture.
Alors, merci pour ces mots.
Thank you very much for these words. Thank you, Madam Ambassador, for your beautiful words. Good morning to all of you. I'm extremely delighted to be here. It's a privilege for me to be in Barcelona and to participate also to this pre-Mondiacult event. It's a privilege also because I was invited already 3 years ago to a similar event that took place in the framework of an event that was held in Mexico pre-Mondiacult 2022 in order to present the results of the study, Fair Culture Towards Sustainable Development, that I had directed and contributed to with a lot of students of the UNESCO Chair on Diversity and Cultural Expressions. It was a study that led to a whole series of recommendations, and the first one was to have a fair culture charter as a first step. So what was, there was a lot of work done since then, because thanks to the support of the German Commission at the UNESCO, but also other partners, the charter was developed in the years later on, and I participated in the elaboration of this document with Farrell, with Eduardo, who will take the floor later on, and people also like Jordi Balta, I don't know if he's here, who participated in many events in Barcelona. There was a whole group of experts from Latin America, from Africa, from Asia, from Europe, from Asia also, who worked very strongly in order to elaborate the content of this charter, with also participation of organizations from civil society, and many representatives are here. So this charter has been launched a little bit more than a year ago. That was in September 2024. And so basically we have moved forward in these past years. But of course, this document is not an end by itself. It's a means to improve the working conditions of artists, but to make the cultural relations conditions more fair, and it is a tool that we need to learn how to use. And this is actually the issue of our debates today. Before giving the floor to the experts who are going to talk about this, I wanted to talk about this charter and insisting on its added value, and also insisting on the importance of other instruments also, and the legal tools that exist also that can help us. And I will be talking about the future stages that we will undergo in order to make sure that this charter, together with other tools, are going to change behaviors. I know that here we have people who work and who have worked on this idea, this concept of fair culture, a lot before than when we started working on this charter. I'm talking about the 15, 20 years, and I really thank these people, and many others maybe are discovering this fair culture movement and its charter. So that's why I want to go back to its main inspiration. Source. What is the fair trade movement? Basically, the practice that was developed as a fair trade throughout the years, and especially all the positive results of the fair trade movements inspired those who started the movement, fair culture, and who redacted this charter. So basically, so what are the sources of inspiration? Not only the awareness raising aspect about working conditions and quality of life of the people who work in building a culture, and also the environmental awareness of certain types of productions, and also an awareness that's absolutely essential in order to really look for products that are more fair. And in order for those products to exist, the consumers need to commit to pay a fair price. And this is the price that has to be paid in order to have a fair salary for the artists, which means a better life conditions for the artists. And the private stakeholders, they need to adopt responsible practices. So basically, in the sector of coffee and chocolate, there are partnerships between the producers, the distributors, in order to improve this fair trade. So we need that we have very tangible impacts that we saw after this fair trade solidarity label. So now we have thousands of products who have the fair trade label, and the life conditions of the producers are much better. So we have 143 countries who receive fair trade products. So the results are very important, and they push us to think. So maybe in a different way, but of course we need to think about how to improve the working conditions and life conditions of artists, and how to improve the cultural exchanges between the countries and the regions. And of course, there are differences between the products that we see in fair trade and the cultural industries. So that's why we need to be very cautious in our work. See, the cultural and creative industries, they have their specificities. So since 20 years ago, we have a convention that highlights this specificity. These cultural products and services are completely different from agricultural and textile products, which are the ones that we see nowadays in the fair trade routes. So you know that in the cultural sector, the products, goods and services, they are extremely linked to the created. They are upheld by the creators. So music, cinema, shows, cinema, etc. Each sector has its own specificities, and this represents a challenge in order to put in application the principles of fair trade in the cultural sector. But beyond these challenges, it is very clear that Many principles of fair trade can be transposed to the cultural sector, and the objectives are similar. For example, it's absolutely fundamental to have a just salary for the artists who are working in the culture. And also in the digital technologies, there are many models also that generate a better fair remuneration. And also with the artificial intelligence new techniques, we need to really think about the fair distribution throughout the whole chain of the impact. So that's why we need to think about new ways to support the local communities, the creators, through investments in infrastructures and initiatives also in capacity building.
Qu'en est-il donc du contenu de la charte? Je voudrais insister sur trois caractéristiques de celle-ci. Premièrement, elle s'appuie, et je pense que c'est très important de le répéter, sur le droit international en vigueur, sur les instruments de l'UNESCO, que l'on pense à la recommandation 80 sur le statut des artistes ou encore la convention de 2005 sur la diversité des expressions culturelles, mais évidemment aussi tous les instruments de droits humains au niveau international, Déclaration universelle, pacte aussi de 66, mais également les instruments régionaux de droits de la personne, charte africaine, convention interaméricaine et bien d'autres. D'autres instruments juridiques aussi, comme les conventions de l'Organisation internationale du travail. Deuxièmement, la charte renforce ces instruments, les mécanismes existants, en établissant des partenariats avec des acteurs non étatiques. Le mouvement exige une collaboration entre toutes les parties prenantes, y compris les entreprises privées, et permet donc d'aller au-delà de la coopération interétatique. Et troisièmement, la charte s'inscrit dans un contexte où l'environnement numérique joue un rôle de plus en plus important et où les systèmes d'intelligence artificielle, sont maintenant désormais largement accessibles et connaissent un déploiement extrêmement rapide, ce qui est source d'opportunités, mais on le sait aussi, de grands défis. Next one. Je vous présente ici le grand objectif, l'objectif donc général de cette charte Fair Culture. Je cite ici son texte. Son objectif général est de promouvoir le respect, la protection et la réalisation des droits sociaux, économiques et culturels et les droits et les autres droits de la personne, des artistes, des créateurs, des autres professionnels de la culture, en garantissant des pratiques de travail plus équitables et des échanges culturels plus équilibrés au niveau local, national, régional et mondial. Et cet objectif, il doit être atteint en activant 4 leviers, que vous voyez en dessous de la citation. Premièrement, faire respecter des conditions de travail.
Dar las condiciones de trabajo decente para los artistas.
Professionnels de la culture, ce qui nous renvoie à la rémunération, à la juste rémunération, à la reconnaissance aussi du travail de ces artistes, mais aussi à quel point c'est important à l'ère de l'intelligence artificielle, cette question de la reconnaissance de l'attribution, du respect évidemment des droits de propriété intellectuelle, y compris dans l'environnement numérique. Deuxième pilier, d'établir un environnement favorable par des investissements dans le secteur culturel à tous les maillons de la chaîne de valeur, aussi par la mise en œuvre de politiques cohérentes, en stimulant des échanges plus équilibrés au niveau, à tous les niveaux, notamment au niveau international, et en soutenant la mobilité des artistes. Il faut engager le secteur privé à travers des partenariats innovants, j'en ai déjà parlé, mais en particulier les entreprises multinationales et les entreprises technologiques. Il y a un devoir de diligence de la part de ces acteurs privés. C'est quoi la diligence? C'est de respecter et mettre en œuvre les droits fondamentaux des individus et des groupes à travers leurs activités d'affaires. Et enfin, de sensibiliser les consommateurs, dernier pilier, et le public à l'importance de protéger et promouvoir la diversité des expressions culturelles, y compris la protection des droits et des conditions de travail des artistes. Vous avez ici maintenant les principes de la charte. Ils sont au nombre de 8. La majorité sont importés de la charte Fairtrade. D'autres prolongent l'esprit de la charte, mais en tenant compte
the scope of the charter, but by taking into account the specificities of the sector. There is no hierarchy amongst these principles, and some of them overlap or are complementary. They all have a role to play. They all aim at promoting equity and sustainable development of the sector. Now, I do not have the time to dwell on each of those principles, but I do invite you to read the charter. It has been distributed today, and it details all of the principles, and every word matters. Every word is the result of the work of the drafting committee that were very thorough, so that all the principles make sense within the creative industry sector and the cultural industry sector, and in the environment where all artists evolve. And in this regard, you shouldn't be surprised. They may sound a little bit general, and this is actually voluntary. These principles want to be universal, but they also want to be accurate and adapted to the sector, as well as the context, the different national, regional, local contexts. And this, of course, is a huge amount of work, but all the principles have a universal foundation, and they call to the responsibility of all stakeholders. I'm actually going to give you just a few examples. I'm not going to talk about all the principles, but let's talk about decent working conditions and fair wages or fair remuneration. This is very linked to fundamental rights of people and the right to benefit from safe working conditions, the right to negotiation, the right to collective representation, the right to the recognition of the professional status of artists, the right to have their economic and social rights respected. They have to be respected, but they also have to be reinforced. And the right to respect of intellectual property as well. And the respect of all these rights is the responsibility of all stakeholders. And I'm thinking here about governments, about private sector, but also civil society, trade unions, professional organizations, and individuals.
Another principle, the diversity des expressions culturelles.
Another principle, the diversity of cultural expressions. This is a principle that is not contained in the Fairtrade Charter. It is actually contained in this charter, and here we are talking about cultural rights and the right to enjoy a diversity of cultural expressions. And of course, we have to bear in mind here the digital environment that we're living in today, the right to discover this diversity of cultural expressions at a local level, for example. It could be, for example, the platform that we use to participate in cultural life or to enjoy from local cultural expressions and so on. And this principle is also related to the digital fracture, the digital gap. In other words, to promote education on digital tools to everybody, and also to enlarge the responsibility of that to everybody as well, including the private business, private sector. Now, local development, this is at the very core of fair trade. This is, in other words, to make exchanges not only benefit large corporations, but rather local communities that participate in the creation of works and in the creation of other cultural products. So this is a crucial principle to respond to these cultural needs, to the local cultural needs, and it is very linked with the idea of capacity building, of this developing the knowledge transfer. And here as well, the private sector has a large role to play. Big corporations have a role to play here. They have to sustain, they have to support this kind of exchanges. They have to promote the exchange of all of this. And also this has to be achieved in a non-extractive manner. Because we know, for example, that, in the digital environment, we're very much related to the data, the economy of data.
envers les populations locales en investissant dans l'écosystème culturel et créatif national et local. Enfin, quelques mots sur le principe d'équité et éthique numérique, un autre principe très important dans la charte qui démontre son actualité, son aspect très moderne, qui a d'ailleurs été élaboré en 2022-2023. C'est l'époque où l'IA générative devient accessible à tous et depuis, ces systèmes n'ont fait que se développer et se perfectionner dans un sens. Eh bien, ici, le principe nous rappelle que l'utilisation des technologies numériques au sein des industries culturelles et créatives doit toujours viser à enrichir la diversité des expressions culturelles et non à s'y substituer et non à prendre la place et à occuper le rôle que jouent les artistes et les professionnels de la culture dans la société. Les approches visant à encadrer les technologies numériques doivent être centrées sur de manière bénéfique et équitable pour toutes les parties prenantes et bien entendu en respecter les droits de propriété intellectuelle, mais aussi à la nécessité de s'attaquer à l'impact environnemental de l'utilisation de ces technologies. Chevauche également le principe du respect de l'environnement. Puis un mot sur la sensibilisation du public et des consommateurs. C'est un principe qui doit jouer un rôle crucial dans la promotion d'un plus grand respect et d'une meilleure appréciation des contributions des artistes et des professionnels de la culture à la société. Cette sensibilisation peut stimuler des efforts pour offrir des meilleures conditions de travail et une rémunération plus équitable aux artistes. Je pense qu'il y a un besoin entre ces rédacteurs ont insisté sur le besoin aussi urgent de mesures ciblant les jeunes en particulier, surtout en lien avec la pratique numérique. Maintenant, au-delà de la charte, quelles actions entreprendre? Quelles sont les prochaines étapes? On peut déjà aller à la prochaine. Je voudrais très, très brièvement revenir sur l'étude dont on a parlé, qui avait été publiée en 2021, qui contenait 6 actions, dont la première était de se doter d'une charte Fairculture. D'autres actions donc étaient recommandées et je vais vous parler des actions 2 et 3, dont la première était d'aller vers une adaptation, en fait c'est l'idée d'aller vers une adaptation des principes de la charte aux différents secteurs des industries culturelles et créatives, parce que comme je l'ai déjà dit, chaque secteur possède ses spécificités et de plus, on parle beaucoup des technologies numériques, mais elles transforment de différentes manières chacun de ces secteurs, et donc il y a un besoin de réfléchir, d'adapter les principes à ces différents secteurs des industries, et idéalement, il faut le faire en collaboration, en fait, c'est ce que prône l'étude, avec les principales les gens du secteur, du milieu, et peut-être les principales alliances internationales. Par exemple, le Conseil international de la musique, la Fédération internationale des acteurs, ou encore l'Association internationale des éditeurs. Je pense qu'on a besoin des gens du secteur pour que ces principes fassent sens en tenant compte des spécificités des différents domaines des industries culturelles et créatives. Et je pense que c'est seulement quand on aura pensé à la manière d'adapter ces principes à ces spécificités qu'on pourra évoluer vers l'action de définir un cadre international visant à établir un label, éventuellement un processus de certification et une stratégie de promotion également de la charte Fairculture dans les différentes régions du monde. Et donc, ce serait là une stratégie à mener pour promouvoir et à quoi sert le label, ultimement, aussi à sensibiliser le public à l'importance, donc à se soucier envers la manière dont la production culturelle se fait et au respect des droits fondamentaux des artistes et des professionnels de la culture. C'est une action qui appelle à la prudence, notamment parce qu'il ne faudrait pas non plus que ce processus de certification, ce label,
this
n'en vienne qu'à
certification
pénaliser
process
les
and
artistes
this
eux-mêmes.
label should not
Les artistes qui ne
penalize
bénéficient pas
artists. I mean,
toujours des
those who
mêmes
cannot
conditions
benefit
de
from the
création.
label
Donc,
should
l'objectif
not
pourrait
be
être,
penalized.
par
They
exemple,
should
peut-être
all enjoy
davantage
the
de
same creation
certifier le
conditions.
processus
For
de
example,
production
this label
ou de
could be
diffusion,
aimed at
d'échange, de
certifying the
commercialisation,
production
et non pas,
process, the
le but n'est pas de
exchange, or the
certifier l'artiste en tant que
commercialization
tel
process,
ou son œuvre.
instead of
Donc, on pourrait
certifying
penser que
the
le label
artist
aurait
or
vocation
the
à
work
s'appliquer,
itself. So the label
n'aurait pas
or the
vocation à s'appliquer
certification
directement aux
process
produits, mais plutôt aux
would
organisations en
be
ligne, aux plateformes de
applied
diffusion,
to not to the
à des
product but
projets,
to the
à des lieux
organizations that
également,
are
ou à des
related with the
événements capables de
dissemination
démontrer
of
le
all
respect des
these
principes
products.
énoncés
And
dans la
of
charte.
course, it would be aimed at
Donc,
respecting the principles that
c'est un
are
vaste chantier, et
listed in
peut-être
the
pour
charter.
aller de l'avant dans le
And
déploiement
so we
de
do have
ces
this
actions, il y aurait lieu de
working
cibler
fields,
un ou deux
and
secteurs
maybe we could
prioritaires.
target
Peut-être
a couple
le
of
secteur de la
priority
musique ou
sectors,
encore
maybe
de
perhaps
l'audiovisuel,
the
du
musical
film, pour
sector or the
initier ce
audiovisual
travail
sector
de
or the
précision
cinema
et
sector, and
d'adaptation des
start
principes,
this
travail de
principle of
mobilisation des
adaptation
acteurs, puis
and
l'élaboration d'un
mobilize more and
principe,
more
d'un
actors
processus
and
de
authors
certification
and
et bien
mobilize
entendu
the
de
certification
suivi.
process and the
Prochain.
follow-up process as well. Next.
Avant de terminer, je ne peux pas conclure sans souligner à quel point cette charte, ce mouvement,
to the fact that this
et
charter,
les prochaines
this
étapes
movement, and whatever comes next
de manière et doivent se réaliser de manière complémentaire avec
achieved in a
d'autres instruments
complementary
juridiques, dont
manner
les
with
instruments juridiques de
other
l'UNESCO.
legal
La charte ne
instruments
vise
like the
pas à les
UNESCO.
remplacer,
I mean, the
à les
Fair Culture
compléter plutôt.
Charter
Et
does
ces
not
instruments,
aim
en particulier la
at
Convention de
replacing
2005,
anything at
jouent
all.
un rôle
It is a
central en fait,
complementary instrument.
continueront de jouer un
And
rôle central
all the
dans la mise
other
en œuvre de politiques
conventions
qui ont
play a
des effets
central
réels
role when it
en
comes to
termes de
implementing
soutien aux
policies
créateurs et aux
that
industries
support
culturelles.
creators and
Ces instruments
cultural
mettent aussi
industries.
en place des lieux
And
d'échange
these
et de
instruments
partage des bonnes pratiques.
set
Ils demeureront
place for
extrêmement
exchange of
pertinents.
good practices,
La
and
charte les
that's why they're
complète
so
en cherchant à
relevant.
mobiliser
Now, the charter
un
is
ensemble de parties prenantes, dont
completing
bien
all
entendu
those
les acteurs
previous
privés,
instruments
pour
because it
améliorer
aims
les
at
conditions de travail
mobilizing
des
many
artistes.
different
Et
stakeholders
vous
in
connaissez sans
order
doute
to
la Convention de
improve
2005 que vous
working
pensiez à ces
conditions for
articles
artists.
traitant de la
We are
coopération et de la
thinking here
solidarité
about the
internationale,
covenant
à
from
ce qui traite de l'éducation et de la
2005, the
sensibilisation
Convention
du
for the
public. Bien
Diversity of
entendu, sur
Cultural
l'article
Expressions.
16, sur le
In
traitement
Article
préférentiel, dans les
16,
pays
there's the
développés doivent
preferential
réserver
treatment that is
aux
mentioned, the
artistes et
preferential
professionnels de la
treatment
culture
that
en termes de
countries
mobilité,
have to
d'accès à leur
reserve
territoire,
to
mais aussi des biens et des services culturels
artists
pour
and
rééquilibrer
to
les
cultural
échanges.
services
La
so
charte
that the
complète
exchanges
et
are
même
well balanced. And now
s'inscrit
the
dans une mise en
charter
œuvre
is
également de
completing
l'article
all of
16
that.
de la
It is
Convention
just
et
another
les
instrument
directives
to
opérationnelles
support the
sur la mise en
convention
œuvre de cette
and to
convention dans
support as well
l'environnement
the
numérique qui
national
date de
directives
2017
that
sont
stem from
aussi
this
en parfaite
convention.
cohérence et
So everything is in
avec les
perfect
principes
coherence
de la
with the
charte Fair
principle
Culture
of
et en
the Fair
particulier son
Culture
principe sur
Charter,
l'éthique et l'équité
especially the
du numérique.
principle of fairness, the digital fairness.
Donc, enfin,
So
ce sera
well,
ma
in the end,
conclusion,
and this is my
cette
conclusion,
complémentarité
this
entre la charte et d'autres
complementarity
initiatives,
between
elle
the
se
charter
manifeste
and
aussi
other
clairement
initiatives is
ces
also
principes de cette charte Fair
shown
Culture
by
et
the principles
quand même
of
5
the
des 6
charter
thèmes
and
prioritaires de
also
Mondiacult.
5
Et le tableau
of
ici le
the
démontre
priorities
parfaitement.
of
La charte est
Mondiacult.
un instrument
Actually,
de
the
droits
charter
humains.
is
Elle
an
favorise
instrument of
l'adoption
human
d'une
rights.
approche fondée sur
It
les droits humains pour
favors
l'élaboration et
the
la mise en
approach of
œuvre
human
de
rights for the
politiques
implementation
culturelles
of
et d'initiatives
cultural
culturelles
policies,
et pour
cultural
soutenir les
initiatives,
échanges
so
culturels.
that
Il
cultural
faut
exchanges are
privilégier une approche
supported.
fondée sur les
We
droits
have
humains
to
quand on
privilege
investit
this
dans le secteur
human
de la
rights
culture,
approach
quand on
when we
s'engage
invest in
en
the
faveur
cultural
d'échanges culturels
industries, when
plus
we're
équilibrés, ou
committing
encore
to
lorsqu'on se
cultural
dote, et nous
exchanges,
sommes
to more
dans ce
balanced
processus
cultural
en ce moment,
exchanges.
de
And
normes,
actually,
de principes pour
we
mieux
have
gouverner
to be
l'environnement
sustained by a
numérique,
series of
ou encore
standards
de
and
règles
principles
pour
or
encadrer
regulations so that we can
le
frame
développement
the
et
development
l'utilisation
and the
des
use
systèmes
of
d'intelligence artificielle.
artificial
La charte est
intelligence
aussi un outil
systems.
pour
And
soutenir
the
l'économie de
charter
la
is
culture,
also a
pour
means
favoriser
to
l'essor de bonnes
sustain
pratiques
economy,
plus
to
éthiques, dès lors qu'il
favor
est
more
question de
equitable
technologie numérique dans le secteur
practices.
de la culture.
And
Elle se préoccupe
in
aussi de
the
l'empreinte
cultural sector,
environnementale des
it
industries culturelles et
also
créatives.
bears
Et
in
enfin,
mind
elle affirme
the
avec
environmental footprint of cultural industries. And the Charter promotes education and awareness raising amongst consumers. This is essential so that we can go towards more equitable relationships amongst all the stakeholders. So Mondiacult is very well equipped now with this charter to stimulate everybody's adhesion to the principles of the charter, so that we can make all the principles a bit more operational and all of this as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
Ok, parfait.
Merci beaucoup, Véronique, vraiment pour cette présentation tout à fait inspirante et surtout pour la vision finalement que vous portez depuis quelques années,
just telling us about all these ideas that are now materialized in the charter, and well, how lucky we are to have all the signatories of the charter, and how it is relevant today to think about this in the framework of Mondiacult. We are happy to commit to that. We understand that it is through these instruments that we will be able to get a fair remuneration for artists, and the convention of 2005 was the first step forward. We can listen to questions from the audience, just a few. You just need to raise your hand, and there's a wireless microphone. There's also the possibility to ask your questions online, and you can also use the QR code here at the board that in order to ask your questions. If you want in written. So well, if you have any questions, we will be happy to answer that. Using the microphone, please.
Et je rappelle aussi que pour les personnes qui nous suivent en ligne, il est tout à fait possible
remind those who are following online that it is possible to ask your questions as well. We will get them in the room. Just a few questions after this excellent presentation of Mrs. Gadramont. Could you please introduce yourself?
Bonjour,
so, hello,
Jean
Crollet.
Bonjour, Alex. Ce que je voudrais faire, c'est faire le lien entre les choses qui ont été faites hier au CCCB
with the things that were said yesterday at CCCB and what we heard today. I would like to, well, to celebrate actually this the presentation of the charter, and this is just another step forward promoted as well by the UNESCO. And I would like to establish the relationship between the project of the objective culture that was presented yesterday by a few NGOs that actually are joining the Fair Culture Initiative, most of them. And I would like to think about how interesting it would be to set a kind of bridge. And I'm not here talking about diplomatic relationships or relationships of this kind, but rather the relationship of the immediate work, I mean, using this instrument, the charter, as a tool to gather synergies and to establish the potential of action for the aims that are common to all of us, especially objectives 5 and 6.
Les cibles 5 et 6 de l'objectif culture tel qui vient d'être publié sont très alignés, et pour cause, puisqu'on s'est concerté de telle manière que cela le soit, avec les objectifs de la charte. Et donc c'est à la fois un appel pour qu'on cherche les moyens de faire converger les énergies, et puis une question quand même, parce que beaucoup de... Not a question, just a comment. La question c'est, est-ce que vous avez déjà des idées sur comment on pourrait
Do you have any idea on how we could move forward this convergence of energies?
Merci beaucoup, John Crowley. Pardon, je ne vous avais pas reconnu avec la lumière du projecteur, en tout cas John Crowley, qui est l'ancien directeur en charge du programme MOS sur les transformations sociales à l'UNESCO. Est-ce qu'il y a une autre question avant de donner la parole à Véronique? Je vois une autre question en salle, ça sera la deuxième.
Bonjour, merci de me donner la parole. Frédéric Jacquemin, on se connaît très bien avec Véronique et tous les experts de la banque UE-UNESCO. D'abord, vraiment mes félicitations pour le travail absolument remarquable qui a été déjà entrepris. J'avais quelques questions, en fait j'en ai plein, donc ce sera sans doute l'occasion d'en
On va en prendre une.
On va juste en prendre une. Vous parlez en fait d'une réflexion éthique, notamment au niveau des programmes de coopération. Je crois qu'il y a aussi des discussions en ce sens-là. Est-ce que le label de certification s'adresse uniquement en fait aux organisations culturelles et pourrait aussi s'étendre aux programmes ou aux agences de coopération culturelle, puisqu'on sait que malgré évidemment toutes les bonnes intentions, parfois des programmes d'appui créent plus de problèmes qu'autre chose. Vous parliez de cette logique extractiviste au niveau des data, mais aussi une logique extractiviste au niveau des talents. On sait que parfois on extrait des talents en fait, de biotopes culturels pour reprendre l'expression, on prend les meilleurs éléments et puis après on détruit en fait ce qui avait été fait auparavant. Donc voilà, est-ce que c'est une préoccupation que vous avez?
Merci pour cette question. Ça revient finalement à une des questions qui est posée en ligne avant de laisser la parole à Véronique Gaponon, c'est sur l'opportunité, grâce à ce travail de la Charte sur une culture équitable, de définir un statut global de l'artiste au niveau européen. Vaste question, je vous laisse la parole pour essayer de synthétiser ces trois questions.
Merci beaucoup et merci pour les questions, les commentaires. Je vais essayer d'être brève parce que je pense que les experts qui vont prendre la parole dans quelques instants ont aussi des éléments de réponse à ces questions. En ce qui concerne la complémentarité avec l'objectif culture, oui et oui, dans le sens que c'est l'idée de tout le mouvement Fair Culture. L'étude qui a précédé le lancement de la charte, l'élaboration de la charte s'intitulait Fair Culture, a Key for Sustainable Development. Et je pense que la reconnaissance d'un objectif culture sera d'un précieux appui pour le mouvement et pour la mise en œuvre de la charte et pour aller vers les prochaines étapes. Où mettre nos énergies, je pense que c'est vraiment dans ce processus de précision des principes aux différents secteurs et de développement du label. Et tout se renforcera mutuellement très certainement. Frédéric, ravi de vous revoir. Je pense qu'on vous avait notamment interrogé dans le cadre de l'étude Fair Culture, comme je pense d'autres personnes ici dans la salle. Oui, je pense que c'est l'idée. L'étude traitait de 3 piliers, du commerce plus équitable, des partenariats plus équitables avec le secteur privé, mais aussi de la coopération culturelle plus équitable. Et bon, ce seront aux personnes qui mettront en œuvre la charte de le définir, mais je pense qu'il y aurait tout à fait de place pour que les organismes de coopération culturelle aussi mettent en œuvre les principes et puissent éventuellement recevoir la certification. Et la troisième question, oh là là, ma mémoire me fait défaut. Ah oui, là ma compétence s'arrête peut-être ici parce que je connais moins spécifiquement le contexte européen. Je pense que le statut de l'artiste doit être reconnu dans toutes les régions du monde, dans toutes les juridictions. Je ne saurais pas par contre me substituer à des experts européens quant à savoir est-ce qu'il faut un statut européen, mais toute initiative visant à renforcer le statut de l'artiste, je pense, ne peut que contribuer positivement à rendre la culture plus équitable, les relations culturelles plus équitables. Merci beaucoup.
Merci encore à Véronique Gaponon pour ces éléments de réflexion et sur le statut de l'artiste. Il faut savoir que bien évidemment l'UNESCO s'est positionné sur une recommandation qui a été adoptée en 1980 précisément sur le statut de l'artiste. Donc c'est quelque chose qui serait peut-être également à regarder. Maintenant on va passer, je dirais, à l'étape suivante. Au-delà de la rédaction, de la signature, il y a maintenant la question de la mise en œuvre. Et c'est précisément le panel qu'on va appeler aujourd'hui à faire venir sur scène pour discuter de l'objet de la certification et de voir suivant quel modus operandi finalement cette certification peut se mettre en place et peut s'opérer avec les différents partenaires institutionnels. Et pour cela, je vais appeler Fairtrade, qui est expert de l'UNESCO, qui était également membre du comité de rédaction, qui va modérer cette session, aux côtés des panélistes que je vais appeler également à rejoindre sur scène, Mamadou Adamou, qui est le vice-président de la Fédération internationale des coalitions pour la diversité culturelle, Sylvia Fischer, qui est secrétaire générale du Conseil international de la musique, Angel González-Sind, qui est vice-président de la Confédération internationale des sociétés d'auteurs et compositeurs, Flum Prim, qui est directeur exécutif de Living Art International Cambodge, je vous en prie, installez-vous, et Eduardo Saravella, qui est économiste en chef de Centre Diplomatie en Colombie, membre de l'équipe également éditoriale de la Charte pour une culture équitable en tant que jeune expert. Voilà, merci encore à vous toutes et à vous tous d'être avec nous aujourd'hui. Comme vous le voyez, c'est un panel des 4 coins du monde que nous avons composé aujourd'hui qui, dans les différents champs de compétences, démontrent une diversité dans l'engagement culturel et dans l'exercice de leur profession. Et je vais laisser maintenant la parole à Farah qui va animer cette session. Merci encore, Farah.
Well, thank you very much for that. I'm extremely honored to be here with a panel of colleagues that I know well, and very happy that we are going to now move to the next stage of unpacking what Veronique eloquently laid out without too much of the technical aspects of building fair charters and things like that. And I must say that the panel of fantastic colleagues I have here could be replaced by any other of the colleagues we have internationally. We could just replace everyone with other people who are working in this very area. So we are today going to present just perspectives that are coming from different parts of the world, different practices, aware that this dialogue is an ongoing process in an initiative that is now a movement where all of you are also part of in terms of learning how to use this chart.
Comment utiliser cette charte? Je suis vraiment très heureux.
Podemos utilizar esta carta. La manera en la que
5 colleagues who have been introduced, just now, will have 3 or so minutes. It's not very long, 3 minutes, to give you a perspective of the framework of action that Veronique talked about, that we are now building into. So a framework of action that eventually building into an international framework for action to see how this charter possibly can work in a very complex and ever-changing and fluid world. And the challenges that are going to be confronted, Frederick, the opportunities that are there, and what sort of suggestions do my colleagues have? I think initially, in terms of giving us a focus, a few suggestions they will have that will be couched as complementary messages to be taken forward tomorrow when policymakers meet in the context of Mondiacult. So we'll go around 3 minutes each. They will choose the reality that they see this charter working in, and then maybe look at a specific area of focus, looking at the possibilities we talked about so that we are very specific of a possible label. We're borrowing from Fairtrade. And what does it look like? Will it work? In what part of the world? I live in Southern Africa, in Zimbabwe, for example. And I see there's a delegation of Zimbabwean government officials there who are keen to see and share whether it at all can work in Southern Africa specifically. Then what we'll do is to look at whether those kinds of suggestions about a label, about systems of certifications can actually work, have problems, or we have to reimagine everything if we must. But the way the charter was written is that any correction to the current charter launched in 2024 has to be agreed in a sort of collaborative process by the people who have signed up to that. So that's how we're going to play it out. And so once they've presented, we'll then come back and have a very quick discussion around some of the ideas that are coming from different parts of the world and their experiences. And then we'll open up to you for a couple of questions that we will then address. And then after that, we'll call upon colleagues who are coming from the creative economy, Matthew Covey, Sebastian Montabonel, and Keith Ness, if they are here, to give us perspectives regards the creative economy. If that sounds okay, we are good to go, because this is it. These are the colleagues who are actually saying, does this thing really work? So we're going to start with Eduardo, who is the younger among us, and see whether Eduardo then will just come up this way towards me and give us your 3 minutes of an area of focus of how you see this. But like you said, perhaps using label and certification to just focus us on something that is practical for the purposes of this particular dialogue.
Sound, yeah. So I have highlights. I'm going to speak in Spanish, actually. Estoy con traducción, así que puedo hablar español. Tengo tres asuntos que resaltar. El primero, la relevancia de un sello o de un certificado relacionado con la cultura justa. Creo que es accionar la iniciativa de la Carta, de poner en contexto y de poner en una iniciativa tangible los 8 principios de la Carta de la Cultura Justa. Entonces, en ese sentido, creo que un sello podría recoger un poco todo el espíritu y tener como una iniciativa accionable desde el momento, digamos, cero de la implementación. Creo que hay que tener en cuenta la relevancia del contexto de la inteligencia artificial. Cuando estuvimos trabajando en el proceso de redacción de la Carta, digamos que eso fue ya hace unos 3 años, el tema pues ya estaba suficientemente avanzado, pero creo que la relevancia que gana cada día el tema de la inteligencia artificial y la cultura justa es inminente tener una acción sobre ello y sobre todo con lo que está pasando recientemente. Por ejemplo, si ustedes saben, Spotify recientemente
Spotify recently just published artists who have more than 1 million of
eso, pues digamos que tener un certificado que sea
so basically to have a label that
puede ser algo que podría aportar desde un sello, un certificado hecho por humano.
Could bring maybe
por otro lado,
added
quisiera
value,
resaltar la
and
necesidad
also I want to talk about the need to really face the challenge of
implementación de un sello en el norte global,
world perspective
en el sur global tenemos, digamos, un contexto macroeconómico
because in the global south basically we have a different economic context. We don't have the same acquisition power that we have in the north. So the willingness to pay by the consumers could be a lot less in the south. So how can we apply this in the different contexts? And finally, I want to talk about the need to really have the distribution platforms and all the intermediaries that participate in this. So we need to be so also we need to talk with the streaming platforms, all the most important platforms, and all the different stakeholders who need to participate in order really to have a label for fair culture that is adopted and accepted by all.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Just checking technically, did everyone get the Spanish translation there? You were struggling, right? Right. If we could have someone just look at that. If there are some people who didn't get the gist of what you're saying in Spanish, just 30 seconds or 15 seconds just to summarize the sort of your focus area in English, Eduardo, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I would like to highlight only 4 aspects. The first one is the relevance of having a fair culture label or certificate. It's very important because it's actually one way to actionate all the principles of the Fair Culture Charter. The second one is the relevance.
Le deuxième est l'importance de la technologie.
Tecnología de inteligencia artificial y cómo necesitamos también
the challenge of implementing the Fair Culture Charter in the Global South. We don't have the same purchase power in the Global South. The macroeconomic context is different, so maybe the action of a label should have like a different perspective depending on the region. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. I think that fits in nicely to you, Flen. Flen Prim is Executive Director of Living Arts Cambodia. And I know you've had a passion for years for working with grassroots and looking at unpacking complex international instruments. And how do you see this particular tool, charter, working in the Global South, but specifically in Asia? You've got your 3 minutes.
Thank you. I want to kind of, I've been thinking about it while reflecting on the whole kind of fair culture idea, and I want to say, like, I really like the directions. A little bit like what Eduardo said, I think, although really happy to have seen that colleagues from the Global South have participated in terms of the thinking, but I still think that there's a pre-assessment and contextualizations that needs to be done from the perspective of the Global South. I think there is a thinking that fair culture and the way it is set in terms of market, in terms of the creative industry, I still feel like the framework is very Global North thinking from the perspective that I read. As an example, if you look, I can speak with Cambodia, but I've seen it elsewhere, some performances are still, hasn't had a fee in it. It's like, it's the willingness of the community giving to a cost or price or a value, I mean, to the cultural experience that they do. So I think in terms of the charter and in terms of the step, I would think that one of the really interesting things to do is how do we bring community, society from the Global South to think this way. I think there's a pre-assessment, pre-education that needs to be done to look at how relevant, if we twist it from a Global South perspective, how relevant all the different kind of 8 principles can be articulated. And I think Véronique said it, it's like these are guiding principles and we have to go into the detail of the region, we have to go, and I want to kind of bring this even more because I think even before we think about the labelizations, we should think about how people really understand this from a Global South perspective. So I think that would be my thinking in terms of how we should be kind of the next step before the labelization is how do we engage that thinking and that context from the Global South.
Well, thank you very much. That was very good. You didn't do your 3 minutes, but thanks very much. That was very concise. One of the things that Véronique talked about is the unique characteristics of culture and the duality of culture that has to be understood. And also being aware that the instrument also addresses primarily the imbalances between the Global North and the Global South, and that there are deep-rooted structural issues there that have to be corrected for the cultural and creative sectors. And you're almost suggesting for us as a recommendation that there has to be a process of public awareness that highlights the uniqueness of Asia, for example, in engaging with the aspect of this. Sorry about that. I meant to keep their time. You can see he had extra time, but I had the opportunity to use that to get into the European perspective, perhaps, with you, Angelis Gonzalez Cinda. You straddle between policy making, filmmaking, being a writer, so the practice of the arts and creative sector, but also the policy making and also running networking associations. What's your take to it? It will be interesting to see whether you're going to wear the hat of an artist, a practitioner, or a policymaker, or addressing the European perspective, if that's something that you want to do.
Thank you. And thank you, UNESCO, for this opportunity to meet, to exchange our views, and to also have this chance to get to know a little better in depth what the chart is for fair culture. It's a very welcome initiative, and like I was saying, I am mainly a filmmaker. I'm a writer and director. I'm right now in the middle of editing my film, so tomorrow I will go back to the editing room. What I'm trying to say is not just to explain to you my autobiography, but the dilemmas of a real artist and creator. And I think I agree with my colleague that that the regional differences and the regional imbalances are, you know, a first step that needs to be really confronted. And to me, being a member of CISAC, which is the Confederacy of International Societies of you know, authors societies that collects the money that the works generate in different territories, we know how this unfairness operates, because there are many countries, even within the privileged North, even within Europe, that grant no rights whatsoever to authors, like Bulgaria, for instance. So not in every country artists have rights, and not in every country there is a collecting society that really can lobby or can push the legal aspects of the protection. And the life of the artist and the career is so unstable that oftentimes they don't have much time to even associate with others and fight for the rights. So that would be, for me, one of the first considerations that I think UNESCO could be useful to support and to encourage, because, you know, the association between artists and creators within, of course, the different fields. I think there's some sectors that have more of a view of the moral responsibilities and of the inequalities, such as visual arts. I think contemporary arts and museums, and in general that world has taken a step forward in this unbalance, and how to really try to fight it and confront it. But in other industries, such as the audiovisual or in music, it's very, very evident. In fact, I am now participating also in parallel to this to another initiative which is called Recreas, which still hasn't come public, which is to try to unite screenwriters that write in Spanish. That means screenwriters from Latin America and North America and Spain that write to the market, and that you know, we have the same employers, but employers, these international companies, they take advantage of the lack of unity and the lack of information. So that would be one very good step that I think UNESCO could be pushing and working, because we are victims to what it's called the buyouts, which means we sign contracts and that take all rights away from us, and that happens all over in the 5 continents, wherever these big companies operate.
Let me just stop you there. Sorry about that, so that we keep within our time, and then we'll come back to your additional thoughts about it. But I think what you're saying then feeds in nicely into you, Celia, working with the International Music Council, and I know we've worked together deep down on the African continent for years, and you've experimented as International Music Council on a possible label and certification system for music. What is that like for you and your members? What does that look like in terms of a framework for action for fair culture?
Thank you very much, Farai, and thank you very much to the organizing national commissions for giving me this opportunity to share experiences and perspectives from the International Music Council, just to position you what the International Music Council is and from which perspective I speak. The International Music Council is the world's largest network of music organizations and institutions dedicated to the advancement of essential music rights for everyone. And right number 4 of the 5 music rights that we have proclaimed is for musical artists to develop the right for musical artists to develop their artistry and communicate it through all media with proper facilities at their disposal. And right number 5 is their right to obtain just recognition and fair remuneration for their work. So we're totally on topic here. with the Fair Culture Charter, and I would like to echo three considerations that were already mentioned by Veronique. Thank you very much for your really fine presentation. There is a first consideration is there is no one size fits all. We need to contextualize. We need to adapt. We need to adapt to sectors, to regions, to countries. And second consideration is we can't do it alone. We need cooperation. We need partnerships. And the third is we need solidarity among us. These are my three main considerations to start the conversation. Now, as we speak about certification or labeling, indeed, we have at the International Music Council some experiences. And from the outset, you can have a very technical approach. A technical approach that is about defining guidelines, defining norms, defining standards, creating indicators, and then you need to have certifying agencies, independent organizations that certify, and I fully agree with Veronique, certify processes, not the product or not the musician. And you can be a bit less technical about it. You can have this development a bit more community-based. So kind of a certification by peers. That would be also one way of doing it with the help of certification experts. And you can, of course, go about the Fair Culture Charter by ways of voluntary adoptions. And here I make the bridge to John Crowley's intervention because the Culture 2030 Goal campaign also proposes ways of voluntary adoption of the proposal of a culture goal to finally show in leading up to the 2027 negotiations for the next development framework, to show by 2027, by all these voluntary adoptions, be it by organizations, be it by countries, be it by cities, that a culture goal is goalable. Actually, culture is goalable and a culture goal is possible. So, but very important, we need to be flexible as we talk about processes of certification, of labeling, need to be flexible, need to be open to revisions. And my 3 minutes up? Okay, so maybe later I could talk about very concrete processes that we have been involved in. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. As a matter of fact, I think you made some very concise contributions there and possible suggestions of what a label and a certification process could look like, but also that as IMC, you've actually tested out, then they sort of seem to be in alignment with some of the things that came out of Veronique's presentation. So that's very useful. So that's music and a network of organizations around the world who have already sort of put together a framework for action, a framework for international action for the tool as well. So thanks very much for that. Then we'll come back to you. Mahamadou Amadou, yes. You are slightly disadvantaged. I know the translation gadget has not worked very well for you, but I am confident that your English allowed you to capture the essence of what they were talking about. But I'm particularly interested in your work coming from Niger, but also your work in government, advising the government, the highest offices, and also as Deputy President of the Federation of Cultural Diversity. Because as Prita, the UNESCO was saying diversity needs to be celebrated and that cultural rights have to be lived. You represent a lot of people around the world, but you've got a specific African perspective. What do you have to say about this particular process of the next stages of the Charter?
D'accord, merci. Je souhaite tout d'abord exprimer ma gratitude à la Commission allemande auprès de l'UNESCO pour sa considération et son soutien constant envers nos initiatives. Remercier aussi la professeure Véronique pour son travail
for
et tout ce qu'elle a
her
fait
work
que
and
nous
everything that she has
allons
done
exploiter ensemble.
that is
La
going to
culture
be very
équitable
positive
ou
for
fair
all of us.
culture doit être
So
compris comme
fair
le
culture
commerce
needs to be
équitable
understood
appliqué à la
as
culture.
a fair trade
Elle
applied
garantit
to
aux
culture.
artistes et
It
créateurs une
guarantees
juste
to
rémunération,
the
des
artists
conditions
and
de travail
creators a
dignes et
good
un accès équitable
remuneration,
aux opportunités.
fair
Tout en protégeant
conditions
la
and fair
culture, la
opportunities,
diversité
protecting
culturelle et
culture
linguistique.
and
C'est un principe
linguistic
fondamental
and
pour
cultural
construire
diversity. It's a
des échanges
main
culturels
principle in order
équilibrés et
to
durables
have
entre le Nord et le Sud.
sustainable
En mars
exchanges between
2023,
the North and
à
the South.
Niamey,
In March
lors de la rencontre
2023 in
des
Niamey,
coalitions
during
africaines pour la
the
diversité
meeting
culturelle,
of the African
nous
Commission
avons
for Cultural
réfléchi aux
Diversity,
grands
we
enjeux.
thought about the main
Et nous
challenges.
sommes donc membres de la
So
Fédération internationale pour la diversité culturelle à travers le monde.
En el mundo.
Et a ce titre,
Y como tal,
avons
hemos
discuté au
hablado a
niveau
nivel de los, a nivel
sur premièrement la réduction pour réduire les inégalités dans les
of
échanges culturels nord-sud,
inequalities in cultural
développer les
exchanges
politiques
between
culturelles de
North
soutien à
and
la
South, to
culture,
develop
encourager
cultural
les industries
policies
culturelles et
to
créatives,
support culture and
promouvoir la
support
création
also the
numérique et
creative
l'accès équitable
actions
aux
and
plateformes
also to
internationales.
promote an access
Mieux comprendre et
to
encadrer
the
l'intelligence
international
artificielle
platforms to
générative
understand
de
much
ses
better the
applications afin
IAG
qu'elle
applications
renforce la
in order
créativité humaine au lieu de le remplacer.
artificial generative
Nous avons beaucoup
intelligence
plus
also to
discuté
reinforce the work of the
sur la
artists also,
facilité
and to protect their rights.
la
And we talked
mobilité
about
des œuvres
the
et des artistes,
better
qui reste
mobility
encore un
of
défi majeur.
the works of arts
Car
and of
aujourd'hui,
the
l'Afrique
artists
qui
also,
porte
which is a major
énormément
challenge nowadays, because
ne
Africa
représente que 3%
that
des
offers
échanges sur le
so
marché
much
mondial.
to the world only
Voyez comment
represents
il y a un grand
3% of the
déséquilibre.
market
Donc, il faudrait
exchanges.
d'abord
So you
qu'au
see that
niveau
we
de
have huge
l'UNESCO, on
inequalities.
puisse
So
d'abord
that's the
travailler
UNESCO
réellement et
needs to
pratiquement
start
sur la
really working and
mobilité
practically
des œuvres et
working
des
on the
artistes.
mobility
Si vous
of
voulez
works of
vraiment une
arts and
intégration
of artists.
du
If we
continent africain.
really want a
La
good
rencontre de
integration of
Niamey
the African
nous a aussi
continent, the
recommandé de
Niamey
travailler
meeting
ensemble
also
pour la mise en
recommended
œuvre
to
de
work
toutes
together
ces
in order
décisions
to
dans un
put
esprit de
in
solidarité et
place
de responsabilité
all
partagée.
these decisions with the spirit
Un an
of
après cette
shared
rencontre,
responsibility.
quelle
After
grande coïncidence,
this
la Fédération
meeting, a big
internationale des
coincidence, the
coalitions pour la diversité
International
culturelle
Federation
a
of the
soutenu et
Coalitions for
reconnu les 8 principes
Cultural
de la charte
Diversity
du mouvement Fair
recognize the
Culture,
8
qui
principles of the Fair
constitue le
Culture
socle de notre
Charter that
engagement
is the
collectif
basis of our
pour
collective
une
commitment
culture
to
équitable
work
et de la
for
promotion,
an
protection des
a
artistes dans le
fair
monde
culture
entier.
and for a protection of
Attention,
artists throughout the world. And
au
of
risque
course,
d'aggraver cette dynamique,
so
l'arrivée de
basically,
l'intelligence
in order
artificielle dans le domaine culturel,
to really
elle
protect
transforme la
artists, because the
réduction, la
arrival of
diffusion et la
artificial
consommation des œuvres.
intelligence basically
L'IA
can
a
really have
peut-être une formidable
negative
levier de
effects, but
créativité, mais elle
it
peut aussi
also
renforcer des
could be a
inégalités
very
si nous n'agissons
positive,
pas avec vision et équité.
but it
Nous
also
devrons
can
nous
push towards
assurer que les
inequalities if
artistes
we don't have a
pleinement
very good
de
vision
cette
in its
révolution,
application.
tout
So
en
we need to
protégeant
make sure
leurs
that the
droits et leurs
artists will
principes.
profit
À
from
Barcelone,
this
ici, nous
evolution,
avons
protecting their
l'opportunité de
rights. In
renforcer
Barcelona,
notre
we'll have the
engagement
opportunity to
sur la scène
reinforce
internationale.
our commitment
La
on
fédération
the international
rassemble les
scene. Our
coalitions
federation
culturelles du monde entier
brings
pour faire
all
avancer ces
the
principes et garantir
cultural
que chaque
representatives
artiste,
in the world in order to
chaque
guarantee
création
that
et
every
chaque
artist,
culture
every
soit respectée et
culture
valorisée
and every
à l'ère du
creation is
numérique.
respected
La
and
culture
valued
équitable
in
est
this
un simple
digital
n'est
world.
pas un simple
The
concept.
fair
Elle est
culture
une
is not
nécessité
only a
vitale.
concept, it is
Elle
a
représente
vital
une
need.
voie pour
It
construire un
represents a
monde
way
plus
to
juste,
build a
inclusif
fairer
et durable
and more
où la
inclusive and sustainable
créativité humaine est
world
pleinement
where
reconnue,
creativity
protégée et
is
partagée.
fully
Voir
recognized
clairement
and
la
protected.
possibilité
We
d'une
have
certification
also
de la
the
charte afin de
possibility of
garantir
a
le travail des artistes
certification of the
et de
charter in order
renforcer
to guarantee the
l'équité
work of the
de la
artists and to reinforce
du domaine
the
culturel.
fairness
Parlons de la
within the
certification.
cultural sector.
Comment
So I'm going
voulez-vous
to talk
réussir une
about the
certification
labeling.
tant que
So how
nous ne
can you have
réussissons
a
pas à
labeling
régler
or a
la
certification
mobilité
if we
des
cannot
artistes et des
really
œuvres artistiques?
solve the
Je
problems
crois
of
que
the
le premier
mobility of
objectif
the
à régler,
works
c'était
and of the artists? To
avant
start
la
with, I
certification,
believe
régler
that
cette
before labeling and before certification, we need to solve the mobility problem. As Professor Veronique said, we need to really think about this in order to later on talk about certification and labeling. So in order to make sure that we take into account all the artists of the whole world, so that's why we need to think about the African countries. So mobility is extremely important through the diplomatic representation relations with the northern countries in the UNESCO in order to improve the mobility. I want to thank the German representation at the UNESCO. I want to thank all the partners in the International Federation for
su compromiso, su visión y su determinación
to make sure that the fair culture is a tangible reality for all artists and all peoples. Together we make culture a real push for equity, for fairness, for diversity, and for integration for all people. Thank you.
So that nicely worked because I was going to do a reverse round. So Mahamadou took his time to really go into the importance of these networks, international networks, and his network in Africa, meetings in Niger, talking about recommendations on the Charter is something that, Veronique, you were saying is important for public awareness and for discussing the uniqueness of the different contexts around the world. So thank you very much for bringing that perspective. Let's quickly go back now. I know Celia, and then also you wanted to finish off on some of the, some of the things that you're doing at IMC. Let's have that quickly, and then I'll go back to Angeles, who wanted to give us a perspective on what she thinks the next the framework for action should be, and then we'll go back to Eduardo and Flan.
Thank you, Farai. Indeed, I would like to share very concrete examples of certification processes that the International Music Council has been involved with. And the first process goes, I take you back to 2006. Veronique said there have been initiatives before. So in 2006, one of our members launched the Fair Music Initiative, and we started to partner with them. A Fair Music Initiative as a new standard for music industry fairness, because as many of us know, the music business is one of the most unfair businesses. And already then, digital transformation had opened new opportunities, but those that are at the creative heart of the industry actually received very unfair compensation for their work, and were suffering from lack of transparent and balanced contracts. So we looked at the contracts actually during this Fair Music Initiative. We also developed a Fair Music Code of Conduct that companies that would be certified would have to commit to. So we developed core principles such as protect freedom of musical expression, respect intellectual property, support access to musical expressions, guarantee fair, balanced contracts, conduct ethical business practices that respect cultural contexts and promote the diversity of cultural expressions while recognizing music's dual cultural and economic value. We developed 3 standards. And again, I have to say 2006, 7 until 11. So one standard was for recorded music, for labels and recording contracts. Another standard was for online music services, so we already then we looked at digital platforms and how they worked. And the third one was for live performance. So we looked at how live music venues were actually working, treating artists. And we developed standards for this. So also to illustrate how certification could go, we developed a common approach to all these standards. We looked at transparency requirements, fair partnership approaches, so that both parties must deal fairly with each other. We introduced, suggested a weighted scoring system with exclusion criteria, with bonus points, with negative weightings. And we also looked at communication agreements. So this was one thing. From this initiative was born many, many years later, the Fair Music Project, another EU co-funded project which IMC is leading since 1.5 years. And the core of this Fair Music project is the Fair Music platform, which really looks at fairness in the music streaming business, and which wants to be a proof of concept that fairness, transparency, diversity is possible. Discoverability, it's possible. So we looked at actually what we did before, and now we also did stakeholder consultations, of course, and they give us all the insights or confirm what we already knew about transparency, et cetera, all the issues with music streaming. So this now will be launched at a beta version very soon. Look at our social media posts, and you can register if you want to test this platform very soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much. It was interesting to give you time to articulate an example of how this framework for action could actually look like. And this is some of the discussions we've had, that perhaps this kind of charter can work for a particular value chain in a creative industry and can work for a particular subsector, for example, performing arts within the music subsector. And that perhaps what you are saying is that there are colleagues who have actually gotten way ahead in terms of actually experimenting on the practicalities of what it would look like. So it'll be interesting to do that further, and maybe to see whether there are colleagues around the world who have not had published processes of labels and certifications. Angelis, let's come back to you and see, we will have the same sort of amount of time so that we then go around and then invite colleagues to contribute as well.
Well, thank you, Farai. I was just looking at my notes, and the data tells us that 95% of cultural exports come from high-income countries. That means that creators in the global south face informal economies, weak intellectual property protection, and limited access to markets. So fairness in culture is about contracts, it's about transparency, it's about making sure that the royalties reach the right people, the authors. And of course, this is not easy, and it's not something that is done in one day, but it can be done, it can be reached. About how useful a label could be for that, I think, and I'm thinking of examples in my field, the audiovisual, let's say labels or certificates of gender equality, or maybe climate respect in the process of making a film, and so on, environmental. These are useful if, unfortunately, the field of culture, and especially the audiovisual, and it's an industry. And it's not just art, it's an industry where money is what makes the world go round. So these labels have been useful if they are an aid for the producer, for the platforms to either have access to public financing, or better access to film festivals, or to some advantage. So if we can reach maybe a better circumstance for artworks, or for pieces of culture to be certified as fair culture, it will be useful if there's a purpose for it, and the purpose has to be financial. But to me, first of all, we need to make sure that all of our colleagues, creators, have a right to royalties, just like we do, for example, in Spain. Without that, it's really difficult to start. And I mean, let's not be here confused. In countries like with very thriving industries like Korea, South Korea, directors do not have a right to royalties. So it's not, just in Africa we're talking about. It's in many other, or in countries in Latin America, where, I mean, the global south is very wide, and we have to all stick together and be, solidarity is crucial, like you were saying.
Well, thank you very much for that. Flan, we did talk about that any label or certification may need to be tried out for a particular value chain in the creative industry sector. And that maybe look at something that can be looked at internationally, an internationally recognized cultural good. How does that now fit with what you originally talked about in terms of the area of grassroots you work in? But also for you, interesting the work you're doing with the digital sphere and AI.
Maybe I'll start with thinking in your questions on the opportunity side, because here we're thinking about the label and what are the opportunity. One aspect that this conversation made me think, because I felt like I started as if it was a bit negative, but in fact it wasn't meant to be from that global south perspective. But I was thinking, we talked about mobility, we talked about how we make sure, I think CJ, you said like bringing everyone together. And I think the transnationality of the thinking of the fair culture is one, but the other side is there's an opportunity for me that could be explored and that could drive into action is also tourism. It's in fact cultural tourism. The fact that if a label can enhance the value of local culture, where when tourists visit, watch performances or buy artifacts, and that elevate the value of the cultural product that are made, I think that could be a very kind of direct way to action this idea of fair culture, because global tourism is huge, and I think this is one kind of particular idea that I want to mention here. In terms of like looking at tourists coming to different sites, global north, global south, but how that enhanced the thing. So that's one particular thing. Then what you said on I think, you asked me the question of AI. I think Eduardo touched upon that. I think this is I don't want to dig into, because this is a whole world of many kind of, we could do not just one session, but we can do a whole conference about that. But yes, I think there is really good questions on how the digital work, and I think it's been mentioned in one of the principles, is how we tackle that. So I don't want to just step into that, because otherwise I will take all the time.
Yeah, thanks very much. I can see Frederic is signaling me, Eduardo, we're going to have to be sort of concise. But building on something, Eduardo, we talked about in the editorial team about something that Veronique repeats all the time, is the multinationals and the premium that goes towards local development, and especially some of the initiatives in South America. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, and then we will then finish. Perhaps come back to Amadou before we have to invite a couple of questions. Is that it, Frederic? Yes, Eduardo.
Yeah, the industry representatives as well. So, yeah, in terms of the value chain, I think it's important to touch a little bit about this topic, because I think covering the whole value chain, production, creation, production, distribution, and exhibition is quite difficult in terms of a potential label. I think we can start suggesting starting with the distributors or the intermediaries. So I would say that could be one of the main value chain links that we should cover. And as you said, I think bringing to the table or to the discussion the big platforms and the big, let's say, providers of distribution and exhibition could be also very important to this discussion, because if we have the traction of the big names and the big companies that are actually creating jobs within the industry, probably we can also improve and motivate other agents within the sector. So that would be. I know I'm conscious of time.
Yeah, so. I know. And Celia, if you don't mind, we can perhaps squeeze you coming back in, but I'd like to bring in the voices of the creative economy. Just to remind me, Frederic, if they are there, who is them? Is it Matthews and Sebastian and Keith? Are they coming up here to say, or a mic is going to be handed to them, just to give us a perspective from the creative economy perspective, in terms of where you see also fitting in with the framework for action. So would like to start. And we'll give you a couple of minutes each. I know it's not a lot of time, but bear with us. Yes, so there's only the two of you, right? So you start. Okay. Those are three of you. Okay.
Okay, so I'm the president of Codex. Chez Codex, nous sommes convaincus que la meilleure façon de faire vivre la charte du mouvement Fair Culture est de bâtir un système qui protège les droits fondamentaux de l'écosystème et remet les artistes au cœur du processus. Je répète, remet les artistes au cœur du processus. Difficile à imaginer, mais le monde de l'art reste l'un des rares secteurs qui repose presque entièrement sur la confiance. Acheter, vendre ou posséder une œuvre d'art se joue souvent sur une simple poignée de main. Une acquisition réussie devrait pourtant être simple. Acheter une œuvre certifiée auprès de son véritable propriétaire avec un transfert de propriété effectif dès le paiement. En théorie, cela paraît évident. En pratique, beaucoup de transactions tournent au litige, parfois jusqu'au tribunal avec des coûts considérables. Le résultat, de la fraude, de l'incertitude et une perte de confiance des collectionneurs. Même les collectionneurs les plus aguerris doutent du processus et ce doute freine l'ensemble du marché. Aujourd'hui, le marché de l'art est sous pression. Il doit se professionnaliser et adopter des standards dignes de l'ampleur, de la complexité et de la valeur des transactions qu'il gère. Chez Codex, nous pensons que la régulation ne passe pas nécessairement par de nouvelles lois, mais par l'implémentation de systèmes numériques qui garantissent, par leur conception même, un comportement légal et légitime. C'est dans cet esprit que nous avons créé le premier réseau de transfert de titres et de règlements dédiés au monde de l'art moderne et contemporain. Une plateforme sécurisée qui assure en temps réel le paiement, la certification et le transfert légal des titres d'œuvres. Imaginez-le comme le Stripe ou le Swift, des transactions artistiques reliant artistes, collectionneurs, galeries, art advisors et institutions. Le tout dans un environnement privé et sécurisé. Le marché de l'art peut ainsi fonctionner avec la même rapidité et la même fiabilité que n'importe quelle autre industrie de haute valeur. C'est une opportunité unique. Nous apportons au marché de l'art l'infrastructure des grandes industries et ainsi fixons un nouveau standard qui gère la certification et le transfert de propriété en garantissant la rémunération de tous les participants en temps réel. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Sebastian, thank you very much.
Sebastian, thank you.
We have, who's next? Oh, okay. Matthew.
That's right. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. My name is Matthew. I run an organization in New York called Afghanistan, and it works the nexus of the entertainment and culture industry and law. So I'm speaking to you from three perspectives. One, from the US, so the belly of the beast of the capitalist culture industry. Two, as a lawyer. And I think three, I want to be speaking briefly about the performing arts. In the beginning of the pandemic, a series of events happened in and around the New York performing arts sector that were very interesting and I think speak very directly to some of the conversations here. First of all, with the pandemic, obviously the cancellations that just rippled throughout the performing arts put artists typically in very difficult situations because it made them realize, this speaks to Angela's what you were talking about when you mentioned contracts, they made them realize the contents of the contracts they'd all been signing for many years, and with a certain degree of horror that they had signed these. The other thing that happened in 2021 was a contract conflict between Montclair State University and a Native American indigenous choreographer named Emily Johnson, who had just sort of put into her contract for a commission something that she called the anti-colonial rider. And the contract conflict that came from that situation became very public in the pages of the New York Times. And it really foregrounded the relationships, the power relationships that are played out in contracts between artists and the people artists work with. And it brought to a real reckoning within the arts about those power relationships and a conversation about contracts being ethical documents, the notion that one's values are represented in the contracts that they create and the contracts they sign. there were two interesting outcomes from this brouhaha that happened during the pandemic. One was the Mellon Foundation, which is close as we've got to anything like an arts council, funded a major grant that required that certain clauses that were kind of in the conversation, certain contract clauses in the contract conversation, be included in any contract that they were going to approve for arts performances. So in that way, normalizing the notion of using contracts as ethical documents. The other thing that happened, I think, was a real effort to create toolkits that would address a whole range of ethical topics that could be plugged into contracts that define the relationships between artists, performing artists, and those who are contracting with them. With the notion that over time, if basically that point where where Britney Spears signs a contract and assumes that it's okay to put a clause that says, well, those in my entourage who are parents should be able to be traveling with venues that handle issues regarding to childcare. Those kinds of things, the idea of how do we normalize those within the legal profession so that the legal profession can start to nudge these ethical ideas into the firmament of the industry and of the cultural sector. Whether it's a question about how force majeure is handled and is it fair, or is the terms of a contract, the payment schedule, is it focused on the process, which typically it wasn't, or is it focused on the product? So I think when we're talking about, this seems material to this conversation, because when we're talking about what are those markers you're looking for, I think it's really important to look at the contracts and also keep in mind the legal profession, which is inherently conservative, but is essential to making this an effective process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much, Matthew. And I know the colleagues that are working with me in the Global South, especially in Africa, the issue of contracts itself, for many of them, I don't know, Celia, if in music industry, there's lack of contracts and no contracts as well, or awareness of contract making. But contract as an ethical tool to look at in terms of the framework for action for the possible implementation of something that is more fair and just is a very interesting proposition. And also, the American perspective with some of the disruptions that we are seeing in the sector coming from that side of the world. Keith Nurse, you are from Trinidad, Tobago, and you're going to give us a perspective. Is it from the College of Science and Technology and Applied Arts, or is it as an industry practitioner? Keith, you've got your 3 minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much, moderator. I wear multiple hats, so I'll speak briefly to them. So yes, I'm the president of a College of Science, Technology, and Applied Arts, where we deal with the cultural sector, of course. But I've been working on the cultural trade element for many years. I've been a consultant to UNESCO, looking, for example, at Article 16, preferential treatment. And so what I want to share draws on several of my hats, one of which is that the chairman of a film distribution company. And we have developed a strategy, because I often argue in many of these circles that strategy trumps policy. Policy is important to create new norms and to create new frameworks, but we do at some point need to create a framework in which our firms and our creative entrepreneurs and our artists are able to implement some of these capacities that are needed. So for example, at Caribbean Tales, we have a strategy that's premised on, we call it the 3D strategy: distribution, digital, and diaspora. And we recognize that none of them can work independently. And so, for example, if you look at distribution, most distribution channels in whichever sector, music, film, photography, you name it, is very much skewed towards the markets in the north. And the frameworks for distribution are so located. So for example, there's geo-blocking. So if you're a producer in the South and you're trying to sell stuff into North America or Europe, can your product be identified digitally? It's very challenging. Many of our producers have to get VPN, which is an additional cost, etc., compared to if you're operating within the global North. So if you look at the digital arena, for example, digital trade, and I heard Angeles making comments about digital trade. Digital trade is the fastest rising area of global trade. It has trumped services and goods exports now. 84% of digital trade is in high-income economies. 14+% is in middle-income countries. So low-income countries are basically all fighting up for about 2% of digital trade. And so other issues relate to that. So for example, talking about fair culture without talking about fair data now becomes almost a problem, which is that many developing countries are not even controlling the data that is collected in their economies. Many developing countries are not even talking about data localization, which is a critical mechanism by which the firms in their country have access to the data that's collected in their own economies. So if we are not talking about data localization, we're not going to generate fair data, and we're not going to generate fair culture. And last point, diasporas. Many developing countries have very large diasporas in the global North and in the global South. These are very lucrative markets generally, and in fact tend to be an extension of the home market. And so tapping into the diasporas is a really important dimension of generating fair culture, if I may. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think in the interest of time, do we have any sort of contributions from those who are following us online? We could take a couple, if there are any questions or contributions, and then do guide me, Frederic, whether what time we have to engage that process, and then come back for concluding remarks from the panel here. So we start with an online contribution, is it? Yes.
I've got. Okay, then I take this. There are two questions. One is for Prim. How can we help change South American minds about paying for culture when many people there live in absolute poverty and culture is seen as a luxury? That is a question specifically to you. And there is also another question, a bit more general. Comment les politiques culturelles peuvent-elles soutenir des initiatives artistiques circulaires comme au Maroc, au Cran de Sésame, pour renforcer leur impact? This is, I think, a question to whoever would like to answer to those, and maybe after that we have to wrap up because we're already over time.
Perhaps let's take the third one, and then they can answer all the three. There's the lady in black, if I can see clearly, at the back.
Correct. So my name is Silvia Amann from Inforele. We are doing international cultural policy development. I'm based in Austria. And it's always interesting to follow these debates, and I think it's very relevant. But I think in culture we have tendency to discuss things from the offer side, and especially with something like a label, I feel it would be also really relevant to see the demand side. So I think, pretty much in line with one of the questions which were online. But my question goes further. So in this context of the Fairtrade culture initiative, did you also consider the audience, the buyers, the B2C elements, also taking into account that there is a well-established fair trade label, and if not, cooperation would be a way forward, because it's very costly to build a label into a market, and also to consider that, for example, in German-speaking countries, 90% of the consumers know already the Fairtrade label. And so in that sense, in order to have access to good markets and to consumers able and willing to pay, this might be also a way forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I think that's the time we have, right, for the questions. And then if I could ask you to then also include your closing remarks, if there is any burning idea, suggestions, or recommendation you'd like to make. So there are 3 questions that you all can speak back into, but perhaps also there is an element that Veronique dealt with in terms of your answer, supply and demand equation of this, the participatory process of this charter 15 years ago, and then the process in the last 5-10 years is all, you know, looking at how to represent the 2 sides of supply and demand of this kind of tool. Who do we start with? South America, it's you, Eduardo, and South Asia, it's you, Prim. Yes, then you.
So in terms of the willingness to pay, regarding the question that the audience asked, I think as much of the things in the reality of politics and economy, the real conditions of the local economy shaped the willingness to pay, the purchase power based on the macroeconomic situation also. I think in the Global South perspective, most of the situations different than Europe or any other regions in the Global South are shaped by the local and the reality and the economy. So, but I think also that we have to work on a campaign to show the importance to pay fair to the artist, and that I know that, for example, the fair trade movement increases the prices of the, for example, coffee around 10%. So probably that's going to translate in the prices of some goods and services if we take this example. And regarding the takeaway, I think trying to implement a label or a certificate is a good first step to implement an initiative that can actionate the principles of the fair culture. But I think we have to think on how to start, and I would say starting with one sector, could be music or performing arts, and involving all the big platforms, big agents that are working on these sectors. So that would be my takeaway.
Maybe I'll help answer the question that was in the room. I do think also I was asking myself the same question about the fair trade and the fair culture. I think there's probably, but I think what I understood from Veronique is that there's already integration and thought that was done also from the beginning of the process. So I think on the demand side, I do think that the value that we create from kind of not the offer, but the demand side is really, really important. So I think the point that you're raising is really valid, because we cannot just think on the offering side ourselves, and what is the consumer or the, as you said, like even like the wholesaler or distributor thinking about. So I think it's a fair, good question. And my takeaway is that I really love the direction and the process. I think, again, we are going toward the detail. I agree with my colleague about starting with sector, and I think performing arts could be one very viable kind of sector to start. And again, I'm just re-emphasizing this fact that there's a pre-work in terms of setting kind of the understanding the environment and the context of a label that we should be thinking. So.
Can I say something just real quick? I think there's a misunderstanding here. It just reminds me of the old days, you know, years ago when piracy was a big problem for the cultural companies, and somehow always, you know, let's say the enemies of culture, that people in the technology companies said, but why will, you know, the consumer pay more? Who said the consumer has to pay more? That's nowhere in the chart. I mean, the value of the work of people in culture is there, and the profit is going to somebody else's pocket. That's a problem. that the profit is not going to the author. And we're not saying an enormous amount, a big percentage of it. We're just saying, you know, the rights should be equal for everybody in this global world, that it's interconnected. It's just not the market in my country or in Zimbabwe or in Nigeria or in Morocco or in Mexico. It's the same market. So why should other writers, you know, have less rights than myself or than somebody in the UK? I just don't get it, because we need all visions in this interconnected, very complex and very unfair world. I need the visions of everybody. I want to have access to the stories that are told everywhere in the world. So I don't see what the consumer has to pay more for this. It's some companies and some people that need to make a little bit, just a little bit less profit. And that's why there's so much opposition for you know, governments all over the world to grant authors the rights. And that's what we need to be you know, working for, that all authors in the world have the same rights. And I think UNESCO can help in that. So thank you.
I will switch to French for my last part. Juste une phrase pour rebondir. Pour moi aussi, enfin pour nous aussi, un label est en fait un moyen de sensibilisation
raising awareness within the audiences. It's to create a lot more knowledge also on the fact that there is a problem, basically, and that the consumer can participate to solve this problem. Just to go back to what you just said, but also I was extremely concrete in what I said this afternoon, so I would like to finish with a very concrete proposal. For example, in order to develop norms for the market of art within the Fair Culture Charter, so to go back to mobility, we need to consider, if we want to develop norms and standards, we need to consider if there are any mechanisms of cooperation between the foreign affairs ministries and the ministries of the interior, the ministries of culture, in order to really face those visa problems for artists. So, for example, in France, we have committees that support artists in that sense, so that gather in order to find solutions all together. So in the country, is there any institution that gives information for the mobility of artists? Are there any mechanisms that allow the artists who already are in a country and who have a possibility to add maybe another gig, but basically their visa allowed them only to stay for 30 days and they have to leave? So are there any mechanisms to allow them to stay a little bit more, for example, or that offer solutions for those artists? And does the personnel in the different consulates in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is trained on the specificities of the working conditions of the artists and the culture professionals? So all these questions and issues can be a part of the development of a certain standard or a norm for fair culture, especially in terms of the access to the market. Thank you very much, Mr. Mahamadou. You have the last word. Well, thank you very much for giving me the word. So basically, I worked as a cultural journalist at the radio and at the national television in Niger, and now I work for civil society in the Nigerian Coalition for the Cultural Diversity. I talked about Africa, and I'm talking now about Africa because I believe that the there is a huge imbalance between the south and the north in terms of access to the market. And also, in order to really respect the charter, we need to have first and foremost a participation of the southern works to access the north in order to allow a larger choice for the different audiences and consumers. And we have an international federation for cultural diversity. So we organized a meeting of all the African coalitions, all the member countries from the South, North, and Central Africa were present in Niamey. And this meeting tackled a lot of issues that we can see in the charter. So it is a good coincidence, basically, which means that it is a reality in the field. I don't want to go through all of them because I don't have time, but mainly Africa produces a huge amount of culture. It's a huge continent that only represents 3% of the world market of culture. So we are way behind, and we need really to see how we can bridge this gap. And also within this charter, we need to see how we can bridge this gap in order to make sure that the great African musicians or groups can export and sell their products in the international markets, or at least to be known through the television channels and other channels in the north. This is the first thing that we need to do when we implement this charter. And now I want to go back to the mobility that is our main issue when we talk between the coalitions in Africa. I remember a debate in UNESCO where we were thinking about the diplomatic representations within the countries. What is the possibility to have a specific visa for culture? So basically, that would be certain conditions that all the artists can have in order to have a specific visa that would allow them to carry out their artistic activities in other countries. So an artist who's very well known in many African countries cannot have a visa to come and represent their work in Africa. It's very difficult to get visa. So we need basically within UNESCO, which is a world organization, to solve. And we have asked over and over for that. And in terms of labeling and certifications, of course, in order to have much better labeling, as Professor said it perfectly, the fundamental right is the first criteria. Of course, I do agree with this. And the second criteria is that they need to know that as long as we cannot certify companies, we won't have a certain fairness between all the different works of art in the country. So in order to be certified, they need to have activities in all different continents, not only in one country or one continent. This is the message. And we have talked about this over and over within the Federation of African Coalitions. And a year later, we had a charter that really took all what we had said. And now what is important is that we need to make sure that not only in Africa, but also in Central, South America, and other geographical areas, we need to have a certain fairness in the mobility of works.
I will not seek to summarize anything. All the contributions are valid. And I'm sure you all know that there are a lot more contributions and views and perspectives. And just perhaps as a reminder that Veronique talked about, that the language that was used in writing the charter deliberately allows for this flexibility and adaptability for suiting the different contexts, within which culture operates. And also that there might be an argument that as the world gets more complex, so is the need to highlight the importance of culture playing a role. And we hope that the German Commission for UNESCO will summarize these things and put together a message that will go to the conference starting tomorrow. I'd like to thank you for taking the time, traveling from all over the world and traveling in all states of health. And thank you, the audience, for being patient and attentive. And thanks for those who participated online. It was a pleasure discussing and sharing these thoughts with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the panelists. And if you want to take your seats again, we have a few minutes of wrapping this session up. And we are already a bit over time and closing in on 6 o'clock, but I promise you we will close around 6 o'clock. Very shortly, I have to excuse ourselves that we have obtained a message from our Kenyan colleagues just minutes before the start of this event that the flight of Ms. Bashir, the principal secretary of the Ministry of Culture of Kenya, was delayed, and she couldn't be here in time. And we have her speech here, but I think in view of the time, I will not read the speech out, but just say 3 sentences from the speech, because she really emphasizes again how important Kenya considers this Fair Culture initiative in the context of Mondiacult 2022 follow-up, and as well in the upcoming years after 2025. Kenya will translate the charter into Kiswahili in the upcoming weeks, and also they consider that charter a good framework in their national efforts to strengthen the establishment of a minimum wage for performing artists in that country. And now, it's one final energizer I would like to put to the room, but also to our colleagues online. Maybe you get out your smartphones and answer from your own perspective, because I assume that most of you here in the room and also those following online have read the charter. And we just would like to know from you, as a kind of last interactive moment of the session, what of the great principles of the Fair Culture Charter are most important for you. And maybe we go to the next slide, Friederike. So there are 9 options possible. You can give multiple answers. There is one answer which says all 8 principles together. That is the first options, but you can also select from those that you see on the screen now. These are the 8 principles of the Charter, and we will have an online voting in a second, once you have also all looked at your mobile phones, and in a 2 or 3 sorry? Yeah, you move on to the next slide.
It says question closed.
Oh no, it's closed.
It's already closed.
Oh, I just opened it. No? Does it work now? Sorry. And now we see on the screen how you're voting, so you can now start to manipulate the results that you see on the screen. This is interactive democracy in action. And we leave that on for maybe 2 or 3 more seconds. It doesn't move at all, but it seems that really the vast majority of you consider the decent working conditions and the fair remuneration as even trumping the collective set of all the 8 principles. And it's also see that the access dimension to the diversity of cultural expressions features very high from your perspective. We will not close this, we will keep the result on, but maybe we move on to the next slide. Do I see people are still active? Some people are still active. But it seems to have settled more or less to a result. I think we can leave it at that, and let's move to something that we think is an outcome of this of the session. We have made excellent experiences at the last Mondiacult 2022 with a message that has come from this side event to the Mondiacult participants, which we have disseminated widely. And it is, we will send from the organizers, so that you don't have to feel obliged to agree or to disagree of what we have brought together as the organizers of this session and disseminate now, but we will share with you the content. So basically it is a one-page document that we, where we basically say in the beginning that we contextualize the Fair Culture Charter in the Mondiacult conference, but in the 12 months, last 12 months since the charter existed, there have been developments that have deepened existing trade imbalances, injustices, and precarities, and that this is due to the fast and largely unregulated expansion of generative AI, new barriers to international artistic mobility, as well as new trade restrictions. And we also, can you go back to look at preferential treatment, where we think as organizers that actually this duty which exists for high-income state parties of the UNESCO 2005 Convention, actually this has diminished rather than expanded. We go on, and there are a couple of proposals that we make to Mondiacult. First of all, reiterating the necessity of the adaptation of the Fairtrade model across the value chains of different cultural and creative sectors. And to one of the questions that was just discussed on the panel now, indeed we are working with Fairtrade. Fairtrade International sits on our advisory board. Fairtrade International is interacting with us on a monthly basis in how to optimally include the practices of fair trade with what we have established. Then we say that it's urgent to design standards and practices that promote fairness and sustainability, much like fair trade has done in other sectors. This is basically about labeling and certification, and we will include, after the discussion that we just have had in the panel, 1 or 2 more sentences, because we heard a lot about the necessity of regional specification and also the high emphasis that was put on international mobility. I think that will have to be included as well, so we will talk with all the organizers that we add these 2 elements, at least from the panel discussion, to this message to Mondiacult. And finally, this is a call to the ministers and delegation of Mondiacult to support the charter, explore domestic strategies for its implementation, and reference it in Mondiacult. And of course, also inviting every participant and every delegation to sign the Fair Culture Charter, which is, after all, an effort to reach out to the private sector and to audiences and the consumers. But we have already had governments and ministries of culture signing up to the charter, and many more are currently considering it. Let's move on. We are also continuing the effort of translating the charter into many languages. Currently, we are at 9 language editions. Before the end of October, we will have, I hope, Chinese, Kiswahili, Portuguese, and until the end of the year, Russian and Korean. And then if some of you have good contacts to people who are experts in translation that to other languages, particularly from the Global South, that would be extremely helpful, because we try to reach out to countries of the Global South in particular in this context. And my last words go here to really also invite you once again to sign this charter. It's another process where you enter into any into any liabilities. You don't get any rights from it, and you don't have any responsibilities. It's a voluntary sign of support that can be expressed as an institution or as an individual as well. We have both available at this website, fair-culture.org. And I hand over to my colleague Alexandre for final words.
Merci beaucoup, Lutz. Merci beaucoup, Lutz. Je pense qu'on peut l'applaudir pour tout l'engagement qui a été le sien à porter cette manifestation. Toute la Commission nationale allemande, bien sûr, mais Lutz a incarné, je dirais, cette voie et cet objectif. On avait dit qu'on terminerait à 18h, il est à peu près 18h, je ne serai pas plus long. Un seul mot final, signez la charte, partagez-la, diffusez-la, supportez-la. Quelques mots de remerciement. Évidemment, de renouveler auprès des administrations qui nous ont soutenus aujourd'hui, auprès de Madame l'ambassadrice de l'Allemagne auprès de l'UNESCO, du directeur général de l'Institut français de Barcelone, de la représentante également de l'UNESCO qui était avec nous. Remercier de nouveau le ministère des Affaires étrangères allemand, le ministère fédéral allemand des Affaires étrangères, le ministère français de la Culture qui nous ont permis d'être ici avec nous, et encore une fois l'Institut français, évidemment, pour ce moment dans cet auditorium, ce dimanche après-midi. Effectivement, vous avez tenu le coup, vous êtes encore avec nous en ce moment-là. Donc ça veut dire que la charte prend vie grâce à vous. Vous portez maintenant cette voix, et c'est vraiment un message qu'il faut incarner et qu'on va devoir incarner pendant ces prochains jours de Mondiacult, avec en premier lieu, et on l'a bien vu, et ça a été bien rendu visible par les votes, la question de la juste rémunération des artistes, qui sera certainement au cœur des débats pendant ces 3 jours. Remercier également les interprètes, les équipes techniques, puis j'ai remercié évidemment la Commission allemande, mais à travers elle, toutes les équipes et les personnes engagées qui ont supporté ce projet. Merci encore à toutes et à tous, et nous poursuivrons les discussions et le débat. Ce n'est pas encore fini, mais pour plus de bonheur, un cocktail vous attend au rez-de-chaussée. Merci à vous.